Hi, thank you so much for tuning in. Today I wanted to talk about game design, particularly with representation and inclusion of queer people in narratives. Just a quick aside, I'll be using the terms LGBTQ+ and queer interchangeably throughout this video. Some people prefer to draw a distinction between them, but for the purposes of this vlog, I'll be equating them. As a marketer and a journalist, I have always been really interested in how our own stories connect us to each other and to the world at large. I love the way that video games especially let us immerse ourselves in the stories of others and lives and events that can be realistic or total fantasy. And by being a part of the story, we get to experience narratives and characters firsthand. This is really important from a representation standpoint. We, the player, become part of the story. In this video, I want to go over some of the history behind LGBTQ+ representation in games and offer some tips on how designers can improve how they implement representation in their games. When we experience narrative, we find parts of it that are relatable to us and latch onto them, which can be great for feeling affirmation or for accepting people that aren't like us if we find parts of stories that aren't relatable or things like that. To help explain this, I found a couple articles that are really good reads. I'm going to go over them a little bit just to summarize, but I highly suggest you give them a look yourself and read them all the way through. I've put links to the articles in the description of this video, so definitely check it out when you're done watching. So the first article I wanted to share with you guys was a study published by Nielsen actually in 2015 about LGBTQ+ representation in games. It's called How Diverse Are Video Gamers and the Characters They Play. This study has a lot of really good statistics on representation of all identities in video games. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on queer people, but again, definitely follow the link in the description if you want to see more. This is a really interesting article. According to the study, 65% of total LGBTQ respondents feel that they disagree with the statement that all sexual orientations have ample representation or inclusion in video game characters. With numbers of queer gamers increasing every day, this is a really large number of people feeling left out, and that's something designers need to address. The second article, written by Ki-Hoon Chan at Polygon, sort of starts to address this issue by talking about how game designers should not go about LGBTQ+ representation. This article discusses two harmful tropes in writing LGBTQ+ stories, queerbaiting and burying your gays. Queerbaiting is the practice of writing ambiguously romantic relationships between two same-gender characters. Coupling is hinted at but never fully realized. This can be really problematic because designers attempt to gain points for diversity and inclusion without actually taking a radical stance. It's borderline exploitative. The second trope she discusses is burying your gays. It's a sort of weird pattern that queer characters are killed off proportionately more than straight characters in media. You see examples of it all the time. And it's an understandable trope. A lot of times character deaths can be really compelling and sad, and they can get us more invested in the plot and in other characters. But in a real world where many queer people are subjected to violence for even existing, it would be nice to see more stories with happy endings for the gays. So after looking at these two articles, I wanted to share 3 helpful tips for game designers to improve LGBTQ+ representation in their games. The first tip is to know your audience. As a marketer, it's really important to know your audience's demographics and pain points, and that's true for game devs too. The LGBTQ+ gaming community is strong and getting stronger by the day, and so it's really important for AAA games to reflect that representation in order to maintain a strong audience. Secondly, who better to design authentic queer narratives than members of the queer community itself? Hiring diverse designers is a great way to avoid falling into potentially harmful tropes and gives your dev studio more background and depth in creativity. Finally, and this is mostly a note for larger AAA game studios, plenty of massively successful indie games center queer characters. Some of my personal favorites include Gone Home, Undertale, and Night in the Woods. And so it's a really good idea to take a look at what makes those games great and emulate some of that narrative in your next games. As game designers, take note of these recommendations and you'll be well on your way to making great queer games and a lot of happy gays. And I think that'll do it. Thank you so much for watching. I love talking all things games, narrative, and queerness. So if you want to chat, you can find me on Twitter. I'll also include a link to the original blog in the description of this video so that you can read more about this topic in particular. All right, thank you again.